December 3, 1945, Sugamo Prison, Tokyo. The winter air outside was sharp, cutting through the silence of a city that had once pulsed with imperial pride. Inside a dim cell, a single bulb flickered, its weak light trembling across cracked walls stained by smoke and dust. Admiral Tsuchihara's hand moved slowly across the paper, each word an act of treason had it been written a year earlier. The ink bled slightly on the rough paper as he described what he had seen and what his country had refused to admit. The war was over, yet for men like him, the real reckoning had just begun. He had commanded ships that once sailed under a rising sun believed to be eternal. He had watched them burn one after another, until the sea itself seemed to devour Japan's ambition. Now, under American custody, the Admiral was writing not a confession of crimes, but of illusions, the illusions that had doomed an empire. Outside the prison walls, Tokyo lay in ruins. Entire districts had vanished, reduced to skeletal remains under the relentless fire of B-29 bombers. Charred trees stood like gravestones in the ash. The air still carried the scent of smoke, mingled with the strange new smell of diesel and steel, the odor of occupation. In the harbor below, American warships rested at anchor, vast and effortless. Their hulls, painted in cold gray, reflected the pale morning light. They were larger than any vessel Japan had ever imagined. The Admiral had once believed that courage could defeat industry, that discipline could overcome machinery. But in those months at sea, from Midway to Leyte, he had witnessed something beyond courage. He had watched the Americans replace entire fleets before Japan could replace a single carrier. He had seen factories in California outproduce entire Japanese provinces. Now, as he wrote his statement for the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, Tsuchihara's tone was steady, almost detached. "We were fighting the ocean itself," he wrote. "No matter how much water you destroy, more always comes." In that cell, surrounded by silence and failure, he understood the truth that had cost millions of lives. Japan had not been defeated by superior tactics or divine punishment. It had been crushed by arithmetic, a war measured not in courage but in numbers. Long before the first bombs fell on Pearl Harbor, one man had already seen the impossible equation forming. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Harvard-educated, fluent in English, and painfully aware of Japan's industrial fragility, had walked the bustling streets of Boston and Washington 2 decades earlier. From 1919 to 1921, he observed the assembly lines of Ford, the sprawling steel mills of Pittsburgh, and the endless oil convoys rolling from Texas. He studied the rhythm of American production and returned home with a warning that his nation refused to hear. In letters now preserved in naval archives, Yamamoto's handwriting is firm, deliberate, yet edged with unease. In January 1941, he wrote to Navy Minister Koshiro Oikawa, "Anyone who has seen the auto factories of Detroit and the oil fields of Texas knows that Japan lacks the power for a naval race with America." These were not words of fear, but of realism, the cold recognition that courage cannot forge steel or refine fuel. But in Tokyo, surrounded by militarists drunk on expansion and divine destiny, his warnings were treated as weakness. The imperial circle believed in willpower, in the unyielding spirit of the Yamato race. To them, America was a nation of soft men, indulgent and materialistic, incapable of the spiritual endurance Japan claimed as its birthright. At military councils, when Yamamoto spoke of oil and steel, others spoke of honor and destiny. The numbers, they insisted, did not matter, because Japan's soul could not be quantified. In secret, Yamamoto continued collecting data. He received reports from Captain Minoru Genda, who visited Boeing's Seattle plant in 1940. There, Genda saw rows of B-17 flying fortresses rolling off assembly lines like clockwork. The factory produced heavy bombers in days that took Japan's Mitsubishi weeks to complete. When Genda returned, his report was precise and unsettling, yet quietly buried by the Naval General Staff. The gap was not a matter of skill. It was scale, an ocean of difference in machines, manpower, and mindset. The United States built aircraft the way Japan built dreams, with faith, repetition, and belief in abundance. The Imperial Navy prepared for glory. America prepared for production. In those last calm months before Pearl Harbor, the path was already set. Yamamoto saw it clearly. A collision not of fleets but of economies. Japan's destiny, he realized, would not be decided by admirals, but by assembly lines. By late 1941, deep inside the Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo, the walls themselves seemed to echo with denial. Charts, maps, and production figures filled the conference tables, yet the truth they revealed was treated as subversive. Japan's own naval economists had compiled accurate data about America's industrial power, but the numbers were too devastating to accept. Admiral Osami Nagano, chief of the Naval General Staff, presented the official briefing to Emperor Hirohito in September 1941. His words were polished, his tone confident. America, he said, was a nation of comfort and softness. Their workers were undisciplined, their factories careless. Quantity without quality. The emperor nodded quietly, while officers around the room murmured in agreement. To them, Japan's warrior spirit would eclipse any mechanical inferiority. The nation's soul, they believed, could forge victories from scarcity. But in the lower offices, the men who handled the figures knew better. Internal reports painted a merciless picture. The United States was producing 19.4 million tons of steel each year. Japan barely reached 5.8. America refined over 4 million barrels of oil daily. Japan's access, even with conquered territories, amounted to less than 55,000. The imbalance wasn't a difference in scale. It was an abyss, a naval officer later recalled during post-war interrogations. We were fully aware of the numbers. We just believed spirit would make up the difference. That belief had become state religion. Questioning it was treason. The idea that Japan could lose was not only heresy, it was mathematically impossible in their minds. At Mitsubishi's aircraft plants, engineers worked with tools worn from overuse, metals recycled from obsolete ships, and supplies rationed by desperation. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, American factories hummed in endless rhythm. 3 shifts a day, weekends included. Detroit's auto lines converted to bombers and tanks overnight. Where Japan saw scarcity as virtue, America saw it as inefficiency to be solved. The gulf widened with every passing month. In meeting rooms perfumed with incense and tradition, Japanese admirals spoke of honor and sacrifice. In America, engineers spoke of horsepower and mass production. It was not a clash of navies but of philosophies, faith against function, pride against process. And as Japan's leaders prepared their fleets for a daring strike on Pearl Harbor, they convinced themselves the impossible could be overcome. They would fight an empire of factories with the power of belief. December 7, 1941, dawn over the Pacific. The sun rose behind the wings of Japan's carrier fleet as it advanced toward Hawaii. 6 carriers, 414 aircraft, and a belief so strong it blinded reason. The strike on Pearl Harbor was meant to shock the world, to cripple America before it could awaken. For 90 minutes, the Imperial Navy unleashed the fury of years spent preparing for one perfect blow. When the last bomb fell, 8 battleships lay burning or sunk in the shallow harbor. 188 aircraft were destroyed, and more than 2,000 Americans were dead. The radio broadcasts in Tokyo roared with triumph. The emperor's subjects celebrated in the streets, believing that destiny itself had chosen them. For a brief, intoxicating moment, Japan felt invincible. But aboard the flagship Akagi, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stood silent. His pilots had returned victorious, yet his instincts whispered a different truth. In his after-action report, written in careful, restrained language, he noted what had not been destroyed: the submarine base, the repair docks, the massive oil storage tanks lining the harbor. The American aircraft carriers, the real heart of the Pacific Fleet, were gone out at sea. It was a victory carved in the wrong places. Commander Minoru Genda, one of the architects of the raid, later admitted in post-war interrogation that he saw something that morning that chilled him. In the harbor, he said, I counted more support vessels, oilers, cargo ships, tenders, than we had in our entire navy. He realized in that moment that Pearl Harbor was not a fleet. It was a fragment of an industrial giant. Tokyo celebrated the destruction of ships that would soon be replaced faster than Japan could repair a destroyer. They had struck at symbols, not substance. Pearl Harbor's smoke concealed a truth far deadlier than any bomb. America's strength was not in its ships, but in its forges, its workers, its limitless supply of material and labor. In the months that followed, while Japan rejoiced in temporary glory, American factories stirred like awakened beasts. Shipyards began to build replacements before the damage reports were even complete. For every ship sunk at Pearl Harbor, 3 more were already being planned. The attack had opened the war with fire, but beneath the smoke lay the blueprint of Japan's defeat. May 1942, the Coral Sea. The first battle in naval history where opposing fleets never saw each other. No thunder of cannons, no ships in sight, only the hum of aircraft engines and the voices of pilots echoing over radios. For Japan, it was meant to be another step toward dominance, a calculated trap to cut off Australia and strangle the Pacific supply lines. But what happened over those restless waters revealed a truth that Japan could no longer ignore. The Imperial Navy's carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku, fresh from Pearl Harbor's glory, clashed against the U.S. carriers Lexington and Yorktown. For 3 days the sky burned, bombs fell, decks erupted, and the ocean turned into a graveyard of twisted metal and drifting oil. The Japanese won tactically. They sank Lexington and crippled Yorktown. Yet beneath that thin layer of triumph, something far greater had been exposed. Back in Tokyo, when reports arrived of the victory, the Naval General Staff cheered. But when engineers examined the aftermath, the celebration faded into unease. Shokaku returned home with her flight deck shredded, her hangars flooded with aviation fuel. It would take 3 months to repair her. Zuikaku, untouched in hull but empty of trained pilots, would need the same time to retrain new air crews. 3 months. In those same 3 months, the United States repaired Yorktown, a ship nearly written off as lost, in just 72 hours. American engineers at Pearl Harbor worked day and night, patching gashes, welding steel, replacing turbines, and relaunching the carrier for the coming Battle of Midway. What took Japan an entire season, America did in 3 days. That difference, when visible on battle maps, was the true weapon of war. Japanese pilots spoke of honor. American dockworkers spoke of deadlines. While Japan built each ship as a work of craftsmanship, America built them as a product, one that could be replaced, scaled, and improved. Admiral Yamamoto received the repair reports in silence. His aide later wrote that he placed the paper on his desk and simply said, "We are facing a nation that builds faster than we can destroy." The Battle of the Coral Sea was no victory. It was a prophecy. It showed the shape of things to come, a war not of heroes but of hammers and factories. The Empire of Japan had won the battle, but the clock had already turned against them. June 4, 1942, Midway Atoll. A patch of coral and sand barely 6 square kilometers wide, yet that morning it became the pivot on which the entire Pacific War would turn. The Imperial Japanese Navy sailed with confidence born from past triumphs. 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, veterans of Pearl Harbor, filled the horizon. Admiral Yamamoto's plan was simple: lure the remaining American carriers into a trap, crush them, and end U.S. resistance in the Pacific forever. But unknown to him, the Americans were already waiting. The codebreakers at Station Hypo had cracked Japan's naval cipher, revealing every movement, every formation. The hunter was about to become the hunted. At 4:30 a.m., Japanese bombers roared over Midway, unleashing their fury on the tiny atoll. Below, U.S. Marines manned anti-aircraft guns, their tracer fire stabbing the dawn. The island burned, but it did not break. From the clouds came the reply. American torpedo bombers and dive bombers launched from Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet. They came in waves, disorganized and outmatched, yet relentless. Entire squadrons were annihilated in minutes, shot down before even releasing a single torpedo. Then, at 10:22 a.m., fate shifted in the span of 5 minutes. A formation of USSBS Dauntless dive bombers spotted the Japanese carriers mid-deck, their flight crews refueling planes, the decks cluttered with bombs and fuel lines. The Americans dived. From the sky, the ocean seemed to explode. Bomb after bomb struck Kaga, Akagi, and Soryu. Within minutes, they were infernos, towering pillars of black smoke rising into the heavens. The heat was so intense that sailors leapt overboard, their uniforms aflame. Admiral Nagumo's flagship Akagi burned to her core. By nightfall, only Hiryu remained afloat, and even she would be found and destroyed hours later. 4 carriers, 250 aircraft. Japan's elite air crews, gone in a single day. When the first reports reached Tokyo, there was silence, shock, denial. Yamamoto received the message aboard his flagship Yamato. His aide recorded his reaction. He closed his eyes and said quietly, "So the gods have turned their faces from us." Midway was more than a defeat. It was a revelation, the moment Japan realized the war it had started could not be won by courage alone. The empire had lost its striking arm, while America, only 6 months into the war, had already begun replacing what was lost. In the smoke of burning carriers, Yamamoto saw the future, a war of attrition Japan could never survive. While the Pacific burned, a different kind of army was mobilizing, one without rifles, without uniforms, and without glory. From Detroit to Seattle, from Pittsburgh to San Diego, America's true weapon began to awaken: its factories. By mid-1942, the United States had become the greatest industrial organism in human history. Every assembly line, every rail yard, every port throbbed with purpose. Henry Ford's Willow Run plant rolled out a brand new B-24 bomber every 63 minutes. Aircraft that Japan's factories would take weeks to complete. Women who had never stepped inside a factory before now welded fuselages, assembled engines, and riveted wings, their hands blistered but unstoppable. They called themselves Rosie the Riveters. Their rhythm, hammer, weld, repeat, became the heartbeat of victory. At the Kaiser shipyards in Richmond, California, a new Liberty ship, a full-sized ocean-going cargo vessel, slid into the water every 4 days. Japan, by contrast, could barely produce 20 destroyers in a year. The numbers were not merely impressive, they were annihilating. Behind this surge was not luck, but logistics. The War Production Board reorganized the entire American economy into a military machine. Automobile factories became tank foundries. Typewriter companies produced machine guns. Toy manufacturers built bomb sites. The U.S. had not only embraced war, it had mechanized it. Japanese intelligence began intercepting reports of these production levels by 1943. They seemed impossible, even fantastical. The Americans, one Japanese officer wrote, build as though they do not understand the limits of men. But that was precisely the truth. America's power was no longer limited by the labor of men, but amplified by the machinery of industry. In Japan, however, factories still operated by hand, with shortages of steel, copper, and fuel. Bombers rolled out slowly, built with care but not with efficiency. Skilled pilots were irreplaceable, while America trained new ones by the thousands each month. A captured Japanese admiral later testified, "At Midway, we lost 4 carriers. In 1 year, the United States launched 12. The math of the war had turned monstrous. America was not fighting Japan, it was outproducing it, outshipping it, outfueling it. Every crate of bullets, every steel beam, every gallon of gasoline was a silent soldier marching across the Pacific. The war's outcome was already being written, not on the battlefield, but in blueprints, factories, and smokestacks stretching beyond the horizon. By 1943, the skies over the Pacific had changed color. Once ruled by the rising sun, they now belonged to the thunder of American engines. The air war had become a war of replacement, and Japan could no longer keep pace. After Midway, Japan's elite naval aviators, men trained through years of brutal discipline, were gone. Each had been the product of nearly a decade of selective training. They were irreplaceable, yet the empire had no choice but to send hastily trained replacements into combat, pilots who had logged barely 100 flight hours. Across the ocean, American flight schools were producing thousands of new pilots every month. Their training facilities stretched from Texas to California, their cockpits filled day and night. The machines they flew were symbols of an unstoppable evolution. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat, designed in just 18 months, was specifically built to destroy the Zero. Faster, stronger, more armored, and able to be mass-produced in staggering numbers. In 1942, Japan built 2,400 aircraft. By 1944, the United States built over $96,000. That imbalance was not just numerical, it was existential. Japan's skies were running out of defenders. Factories in Nagoya struggled to find aluminum. Fuel shipments dwindled under American submarine attacks. and pilots began flying into battle on fumes. Over the Solomon Islands, the truth unfolded in terrifying clarity. American carrier groups swept the skies in waves, radar-guided, radio-coordinated, and supplied with endless fuel and ammunition. Japanese pilots often fought until their guns clicked empty, then rammed their crippled planes into the sea. One veteran, Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, wrote later, "We faced an enemy who could lose 100 planes in a day and replace them by the next sunrise. We could not." As the Americans pushed closer to Japan's island bastions, Guadalcanal, the Gilberts, the Marshalls, the losses became catastrophic. Japan's once legendary Zero fighters fell from the skies faster than they could be replaced. Even their aces began to vanish, swallowed by the endless swarm of American planes that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. For the first time, the Japanese command faced a reality they could no longer deny. The skies, once their symbol of dominance, had become American territory. And every lost pilot, every downed Zero, every burning hangar was a line in Yamamoto's unspoken prophecy coming true. We can run wild for 6 months. After that, I have no expectation of success. By 1943, those 6 months were long gone, and Japan was falling from the heavens it once ruled. By late 1943, Japan's empire stretched wide on the map, but its lifeblood was running dry. The Imperial Navy still possessed ships, guns, and courage. Yet without oil, all of it was useless. The very ocean that had once carried Japan's ambitions now became its prison. Every warship, every aircraft, every truck on every island depended on oil, and oil was the one thing Japan never truly had. From the first day of the war, Yamamoto had known this would be the decisive factor. Japan's invasion of the Dutch East Indies had been driven not by conquest, but by desperation for fuel. Yet now, even those captured oil fields had turned to dust under American bombardment. By 1943, the U.S. submarine fleet had perfected a new, ruthless strategy: total maritime blockade. Silent hunters prowled Japan's supply lines from the South China Sea to the home islands, sinking tankers faster than they could be replaced. In one 12-month span, America destroyed over 2/3 of Japan's merchant fleet. The sea lanes, once the arteries of empire, became watery graves filled with burning oil and sinking steel. Inside Japan, fuel rationing became national agony. Pilots trained only for minutes each day. Some aircraft were towed to the runway by oxen to save gasoline. Entire fleets remained anchored, waiting for missions that would never come. The mighty battleship Yamamoto, pride of the Imperial Navy, consumed 6,000 tons of fuel just to sail to sea. By 1944, it could barely leave port. In contrast, the U.S. Pacific Fleet seemed limitless. Floating oilers refueled carriers at sea, ensuring American task forces never had to return to port. The warships of the United States moved with industrial immortality, as if the ocean itself had chosen a side. Captured Japanese sailors later recalled the horror of watching American destroyers and carriers swarm the seas, always supplied, always fueled. One prisoner, stunned by what he saw aboard a captured American oiler, whispered, "They bring their cities with them." The Imperial Navy, once the spear of Japan's destiny, had become a ghost fleet, trapped by its own hunger for oil, and Yamamoto's greatest fear had come true. Japan had entered a war it could never sustain, against a nation that could create fuel as fast as Japan could dream of using it. The sea, once Japan's path to glory, had turned against it. Every wave now carried not opportunity but inevitability. By 1944, the Pacific no longer echoed with Japan's triumphs. It burned with America's retribution. The war that Yamamoto had feared, the war of attrition, of factories, of endless machines, had fully arrived. And now, it came from the sky in waves of steel and fire. From the runways of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, the new American giants took flight, the Boeing B-29 superfortresses. These bombers were not weapons of chance, but of pure industrial calculation. Each one the product of 100,000 parts, 900,000 man-hours, and the strength of a nation that had learned how to turn blueprints into annihilation. Their engines roared with a sound Japan had never imagined. Distant, unstoppable thunder rolling across the Pacific. The first B-29 raids began in 1944. At first, high-altitude bombing achieved little. The jet stream scattered bombs across the countryside. But soon, U.S. commanders found the formula: nighttime incendiary raids. And when they came, Japan's wooden cities became oceans of flame. March 9, 1945, Tokyo. 334 B-29s crossed the city in a single night. They carried napalm and magnesium incendiaries, designed not to destroy buildings but to burn humanity itself. Within hours, 16 square miles of the capital vanished. The heat was so intense that canals boiled, glass melted, and asphalt ran like water. More than 100,000 civilians perished, a firestorm deadlier than Hiroshima. Yet what stunned Japan most wasn't the horror, it was the scale. After the raid, reconnaissance pilots counted over 300 B-29s returning. America had lost only 14, and before Tokyo's ashes cooled, the next wave was already being prepared. By this time, Japan's air defenses were collapsing. Their factories, bombed daily, could no longer produce enough aircraft, guns, or ammunition. Pilots were sent to fight without parachutes. Students were trained as suicide interceptors. The empire's arsenal had turned into desperation. Meanwhile, American industry was producing at a rhythm that bordered on the divine. Every week, 2,000 new bombers. Every day, 100 new tanks. Every minute, new bullets, new ships, new engines. The war had become one-sided, not between armies, but between systems of creation and systems of exhaustion. For every Japanese city that burned, another lesson was written in smoke: that in the modern age, courage without capacity was suicide. Admiral Yamamoto had once warned that Japan could run wild for 6 months. By 1944, the empire was not running wild. It was running on fumes, and above the ruins of Tokyo, in the glare of endless fire, the shadow of the next horror, atomic light, was already forming. August 6, 1945, Hiroshima. A clear summer morning. Children walking to school. Office workers beginning their day. Soldiers repairing trenches that would never be used. The air was still deceptively peaceful. Then at 8:15 a.m., a single B-29 named Enola Gay appeared in the sky. Inside its bomb bay rested Little Boy, the product of science and industry on a scale the world had never seen. It wasn't forged for revenge, it was engineered as a mathematical conclusion. Every ton of steel, every gallon of oil, every factory humming in America had built toward this one moment. At 1,900 feet above Hiroshima, the bomb detonated. In less than a second, the city ceased to exist. A blinding white light erupted, hotter than the surface of the sun. Buildings vaporized. Shadows of humans were seared onto walls that no longer stood. A firestorm swept outward at 4,000 degrees Celsius, devouring oxygen and life alike. 70,000 people vanished instantly. Tens of thousands more died in the hours and days that followed. Their skin burned away, their eyes turned to ash. For miles, silence followed. Then, a rising pillar of black smoke, the first atomic mushroom cloud in history, stretched over Japan. The sound reached Tokyo like a whisper from another world. 3 days later, Nagasaki followed. For the men of science who built it, the bomb was a grim triumph. For Japan, it was the death of a century-old dream, the vision of divine destiny of an empire chosen by heaven. For Admiral Yamamoto's prophecy, it was the final proof. No courage, no willpower, no divine wind could stand against the cold arithmetic of industry. Even before Hiroshima, Japan was already dying. Its cities were rubble, its fleets sunk, its skies American. The bomb didn't end the war. It confirmed what was already written in steel, oil, and fire. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito broke 2,600 years of imperial silence and spoke to his people for the first time. His voice, calm, weary, defeated, drifted through the radio. The enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb. Should we continue to fight, it would lead to the total extinction of human civilization. Across Japan, millions wept. The nation that had once sought to conquer Asia now listened to the sound of its own surrender. And somewhere in the vast silence of the Pacific, the ghost of Admiral Yamamoto might have whispered, "I warned you." We awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve. September 2nd, 1945, Tokyo Bay. The gray steel deck of the USS Missouri glistened beneath a calm morning rain. Above it, the once invincible empire of Japan prepared to sign its own death warrant. Around the table stood the victors, Americans, British, Soviets, Chinese, and the world's new order embodied in crisp uniforms and cold eyes. General Douglas MacArthur's voice echoed across the deck. "We are gathered here, representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored." Opposite him, Japan's foreign minister, Mamoru Shigemitsu, limped forward on his cane. His hands trembled as he lifted the pen. Each stroke of ink across the surrender document felt like the cracking of an empire's bones. Behind him stood General Yoshijiro Umezu, his face expressionless, his eyes hollow. The signatures were brief, the silence eternal. For the Japanese officers who had once believed in divine victory, this scene was unthinkable. Their fleets gone, their cities ashes, their emperor silent. In the months following the surrender, Allied investigators and war correspondents walked through the ruins of Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, and Yokohama. What they found was a nation stripped not only of weapons but of illusions. The factories that once built aircraft now stood twisted and burned. Children scavenged metal from wreckage once destined for Zero fighters. Trains crawled through flattened cities, their passengers silent and hungry. Food was scarce, fuel non-existent. Japan, which had once boasted of spiritual superiority, now depended on American grain to survive. In interrogation rooms, captured admirals and generals spoke with haunting honesty. One of them, Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome, said, "We did not lose to men. We lost to machines, to an industry beyond imagination." Even the most loyal officers admitted what they had denied for years, that Yamamoto had been right all along. His letters, recovered from military archives, read now like prophecy. "If I am ordered to fight, I shall run wild for 6 months. But beyond that, I can promise nothing." Japan had run wild for 6 months. Then came Midway, the blockade, the fire, and the atom. Now in the quiet aftermath, the Japanese people faced the truth that had been forbidden for years. That spirit without substance, courage without resources, and faith without understanding lead only to ruin. Yet amid the devastation, something began to stir. Not the return of empire, but the rebirth of humility. The same discipline that had fueled Japan's war machine would now rebuild it. Not for conquest, but for survival. And on that morning aboard the Missouri, as the ink dried and MacArthur declared peace restored, the world turned a page. The age of the sword had ended. The age of the machine had won. The war had ended, but its arithmetic lingered. Not in headlines or speeches, but in ledgers, equations, and factories that told the truest story of all. The numbers of production of men of steel, they had not just defeated Japan, they had redefined the nature of war itself. In 1946, American occupation officers compiled the final United States Strategic Bombing Survey report. It wasn't propaganda. It was an autopsy. A cold dissection of how an empire drowned under the weight of industry. Japan's entire war output in every category had been outmatched tenfold. Every plane they built, America built 10. Every ship, 10. Every ton of steel, 15. Every barrel of oil, 150. No general, no tactic, no miracle could alter that equation. In Sugamo Prison, the surviving admirals and generals read the survey with quiet disbelief. Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai wrote in his cell, "We worshipped courage, but it was the factory worker who ruled the world." Across Japan, the truth became impossible to ignore. The empire's collapse had been inevitable from the moment it began. Not because its soldiers lacked bravery, but because bravery cannot forge aluminum, refine oil, or feed armies. General Umezu, before his execution, left behind a single written confession. "We believed one Japanese soldier equaled 3 Americans. But we did not count the factories that made those Americans invincible. We brought swords to a factory war. Out of those ruins, a strange transformation began. American engineers who had once targeted Japan's factories now helped rebuild them. The same docks where Zero fighters had been assembled now turned out sewing machines, radios, bicycles, and cameras. Under the guidance of men like W. Edwards Deming, Japan's defeated industrialists learned the American secrets of mass production, quality control, and process precision. Within a generation, the nation that had been crushed by America's industry would rise to master it. Toyota, Sony, Mitsubishi, and Panasonic. These were the legacies of defeat reborn as engines of peace. By the 1970s, Japanese technology powered the world that had once destroyed it. The admirals who had confessed Japan's failure did not live to see it, but their words echoed in every new factory and every glowing assembly line, that the true power of a nation lies not in its armies, but in its ability to build, create, and sustain, 10 times the industrial capacity. In those words lay the prophecy of the Pacific War, and the foundation of the post-war world. The war that Japan could never win had given birth to a peace that no one could imagine. The machines that once forged destruction now forged destiny, and in the silence that followed, the world learned its final lesson, that in the modern age the greatest weapon is production itself.